Jock, if I may talk with you, not as the Mayor of Alice Springs, but as a Territorian. I've met some great people up here in my brief spell, but I believe you are virtually, you can call yourself a Territorian.
I think I qualify, Bill. After all, I came into the Territory in 1913, arrived at Darwin with the family, of course, and...
Are you going to stay?
I think that now that I've got my roots down and I have a certain amount of creditors about the place, I'd better.
1913. I won't ask you how old you were, but then the family came to the Territory then. Whereabouts to? To Darwin, did he say?
We came to Darwin in the first place in 1913. We put in a good few years there. I think it was about 12 or 14 years. Went south for a few years, only 2 or 3 years, and then returned to Central Australia, and I've been here ever since.
Now, I've heard a lot of the top end, and there seems to be the old Sydney-Melbourne stuff here, the top end in Alice Springs, but what did you think of Darwin?
I had a great liking for Darwin. There has been no animosity between Darwin versus Alice Springs as far as I'm concerned. My school days were spent in Darwin. I have a lot of good friends still in Darwin from my school days even, and I've made a lot of good friends there since. I've also, of course, I've met a lot of good friends in Alice Springs, made a lot of good friends. I married a local girl, and so I feel that I'm a Territorian. I have no animosity towards the top end. I'm a Territorian and not a top ender or a southern ender.
I was speaking with Cloudy Beer last week, and she was talking of a fellow called Mr. Hayes, whom no doubt you'd recall, but he didn't like these bloody top enders.
Well, this is right. I would think in the days that Cloudy was talking about, you had a completely isolated community, north versus south. A gap in between, a sort of no man's land, but these days it's never quite the same. You have an affinity now, whether you like it or not, by administration and by legislation. All these things tend to, I would feel, tend to make you one entity. But in my case, of course, it wasn't the case that Cloudy speaks of. I had been in the north, I had grown up in the north, and I had come to the south, and I had a very, very happy association with the south as well.
Jock, what did you first do when you left school?
Well, I came back here to Harper Springs Station. Ted Dixon was the owner of the station at that particular time. Strangely enough, I now own the place, but I put in a couple of years there with Ted as a jackaroo, knocking around, learnt a bit of the stock work that everybody has to learn, of course, if they're going to go into stock at some later stage, and I feel they were the most interesting years of my life. The experiences, of course, that you gained in those times will never be repeated because of the varying conditions and the different conditions. For instance, we used to have a 6-weekly mail run. That used to call it Tea Tree Well, which was the nearest port of call as far as we were concerned, some 50 miles away. And initially, of course, this was done by horses, pack horses. Then the motor mails came. Wallace Fogarty got the first motor contract as far as I recall, and we used to toddle across there every 6 weeks to pick up the mail and provisions and come back again. Now there has been occasions, of course, when this didn't quite work out according to the book. In those days we had no wireless, no refrigeration, no other means of communication, and we would sit around, of course, the calendar, which went on from one day to the other. There was no Saturdays, Sundays or Mondays concerned. Some days we would forget to mark off a date, other times the three of us would mark off a date, and I know on many occasions we've gone over to Tea Tree 2 days early or 2 days late, not being quite sure of the actual date on the particular occasion.
What if you went early? Did you hang around and wait?
Yes, you had to hang around and wait because there was no use going 50 miles back and then returning. I speak of the days, of course, when we used to go with camels and we used to go with the drays, with 3 horses and a dray. Other times we would go with camels depending on what loading or what provisions we were expecting. And it would take us a day and a half going over a day and a half coming back with the camels. It would take us 2 days with the dray.
The camel, it's a funny looking animal. I don't know much about them. They'd be pretty ordinary sort of beasts, wouldn't they?
I would think the camel would be the greatest beast that ever came into the country. You could travel for 50 or 60 miles with him if you had to per day. You could also tie him up to a tree. There was no problems about looking for grass for him. You didn't have to give him a drink every day. And I would think that the country would not have reached the stage that it has reached today if it hadn't have been for the camel. He was a wonderful animal.
He just looked ornery.
He just did, and some of them were too, don't believe me. But others of course, were quite amenable to the ordinary, what shall we say, the ordinary conditions of station life and outback life.
Jock, who in those days, the days of the camel and the drays, who are some of the characters you can recall?
Well, there's Ted Dixon, of course, who was the owner of the place. There's Billy Lowe. They used to call him Whispering Billy, of course. He had a husky throat, and you could just hear him at many an occasion. And the one occasion we had a little wee eye around the place, and he said, you know that Billy Lowe? He said, Jock? I said, yes. He said, you know, he's a silly bugger. He said, he can't whistle, he can't talk even. He said, he's proper silly. But these are the characters, of course, around the station. You had Bill Heffernan at Tea Tree Well, you had Billy Welburn, Billy Bristow, and subsequently young Bill Briscoe. Well, young Bill Briscoe was 60 odd, and old Billy was about 80 or 90, and these were the sort of characters that used to roam up and down the place.
But these are the fellas that made the territory, Jock.
Well, they did. We came after. These were the chaps that paved the way, of course, and we came after. We reaped the advantages, and the future generations will capitalise on the things that we do.
You say that pretty lightly, we came after, but you came at a pretty tough time too. I was talking to a fellow called Bill Schimmel, who's now down south there in the Barossa Valley, and I think he was telling me of one trip you did from the top end, and I think you're coming down to the Alice, and you ran out of petrol or something in a big truck. No, I think the truck blew up or something.
Well, this was the occasion when we went up with the mail. The mail was Sam Irvine, the mailman, and the truck was his. So I didn't run out. All I had to do was to walk back with Bill and get some petrol, or alert a fellow at Newcastle Waters to bring out petrol to get us going again. But the petrol stations, of course, were few and far between in those days. I would think that this would be the only petrol at that stage between Alice Springs and Catherine.
And in those days, you'd only get them in cans anyway.
You had the cans, or you had 8-gallon drums and 4-gallon cans. Often, of course, you carried the cans, 2 cans to the case. Nothing unusual to find the cans spring a leak on the rough roads that were the order of the day in those particular times, and you'd find that you didn't have a petrol, or you'd find you had a half a can and not a full can of petrol.
Jock, I heard on the air I think about a week ago, of yet another death of a bloke perishing out back, running out of his car breaking down, and he had no water. Why does this happen in 1973 after all these years?
Well, you could probably understand it in the days that I speak of, but you cannot understand these things happening in this day and age. People will take risks out of all proportion to the requirements of the situation. Why should people go out anywhere with a motor car without having adequate water supplies for a few days? You see them take on the Birdsville track, you see them go out in other directions, and they might have a gallon of water with them. And when they do consume the water, of course, they then do the things that they shouldn't do. They will get out and walk in the boiling sun when they should stay under a shady tree or under the shade of the car, even if they've got to crawl underneath it. In this day and age, there's always somebody comes along. Maybe you have to wait a day, maybe you have to wait 2 days or 3 days, but if you carry water that will see you over this particular period of time, I don't think you're in any danger of perishing.
I bring this point up, Jock, I think advisedly, because it seems no matter how often we talk or people talk, there are some who will come to the territory, lack of knowledge of the place, and they think, oh, I can do this, and the vehicle will get me from here to there, but they will not take these basic precautions and be told by people who know.
You know, it is a fact, Bill, that even today, you'll go down, if you were to pull up the cars that came up along that south road from Port Augusta to Alice Springs, if you pulled up every car, you would find cars coming up that road without jacks, without spares, without adequate supplies of petrol, certainly without adequate supplies of water. And how there is not more tragedies along there, I'll never know. But these are the risks that people take unnecessarily, because they often have women, often have children on board. They don't only jeopardise their own life, but they jeopardise the life of their friends and their actual relatives and their children.
You mentioned the famous Birdsville track. What's your first recollection of this?
Well, I haven't been up the Birdsville track, Bill. I think this is one of the things that I have to fill in the gaps one of these days, but the Birdsville track is not one of my haunts. I haven't been up in that direction. I've been around Maori and the points of contact with the rail, but I must confess I haven't been up the Birdsville track.
Well, that surprises me, because you are, as so many have told me, and these from Territorians, I think you've got to be here 50 years before they sort of recognise you, but they've accepted you.
Well, I don't confess to have been everywhere, you know, in the in the words of the old song, but I've been around quite a few places, but there are still spots on the map that I haven't been to.
Fair enough. In fact, I think this magnificent territory, and unfortunately I've seen nothing yet more than the Alice. I will indeed before I leave this place, I sincerely trust, but there is so much to see. You could spend a lifetime exploring this place.
Well, this is right. In the territory, of course, you must realise you have a sixth of Australia, 500,000 square miles, and this takes quite a bit of getting over, no matter how long and how hard you travel. There's plenty of places off the road that you'll never get to. I've been to most of the places on the road, and quite a few of them that are off the road. But there's still odd spots around the territory itself, without going down the Birdsville track, that I haven't actually made contact with.
What's your first recollection of Alice Springs?
Alice Springs, it was in September 1926 that I first arrived here on the back of a truck, and you'll notice the photo on the wall. That was Alice Springs in 1926.
Where is it? Not the photo. Alice Springs, only about 3 buildings there.
I believe at that stage, and I've just checked this recently, that the population of Alice Springs at that stage was 43.
43. What are those buildings there?
Well, the main one, the one that stands out, of course, is the AIM hostel in Todd Street.
Oh, yeah.
Just, it hadn't quite completed then, but...
that then is Todd Street?
That is Todd Street. The next building, of course, is Raggett Store. The following one is Stewart Arms, as we know it, not as we know it today, but as we knew it then. And on the far corner, where the Shell service station is now, is Wallace Fogarty's store. That consisted of Todd Street.
Yeah, well, for the listeners, it's a beautiful photograph, for 1926 particularly, but it's basically a photograph of trees and hills with a couple of buildings in the middle.
This is right. That photo, I am told, was taken by John Flynn on the occasion of the opening of the hostel in 1926. It's
a magnificent photograph.
Yes. For the reason that it was taken in 1926, of course, that was the reason that I acquired a copy of it and had it enlarged.
Did you meet Flynn?
Yes, met Flynn quite a lot. He was up and down here in those days, of course, frequently, and we've seen quite a lot of him.
Well, recently there have been sort of stupid reports, I think they're stupid reports to come out of the past where people are trying to dig a bit of dirt, I think, as much as anything. But that seems to be this day and age. What sort of a bloke was he?
Well, as far as we knew and as far as we were concerned, he was a great benefactor. He started, of course, the Flying Doctor. He started the hostel arrangements that we have here today, the health requirements, and this was the day before Commonwealth or any other government stepped in with health requirements. And he has been accused of racism and that. Well, I'm not in a position to go over the whole history of John Flynn, and can't record his thoughts. But I think you have to weigh the good that a man does in his lifetime to really assess the man. And if I look back on the people who criticise John Flint today, I know in the final count who will be the judge, the person who has benefited humanity the most.
Fair enough. I was going to comment. You've done it for me. Yes, a great man indeed. These are the days of Smithy too, and Harry Purvis once was a co-pilot, or was a one-time co-pilot of Smithy. Did you meet Smithy?
I only met him on his way through different times. I met him in Sydney on one occasion, but I can't say that I knew him. I recall, of course, the times when he was lost over here on the northwest Cape. I was a child. I was allowed in Darwin, of course, when Ross Smith arrived. His plane is now at Adelaide. I was there when Pera arrived from overseas. So in my short lifetime on the Territory, I have seen the whole history of aviation unfold before my eyes, from the days of Ross Smith to the days now of the 707s and the 727s and the 747s.
I was going to say, Jock, what a magnificent age we've lived in, for the days, for instance, from a camel to fellas walking about on the moon.
It is. It's a remarkable age, and when you consider the things that have happened in this time, aviation, wireless, all these televisions, moon landings, and to think, in a man's lifetime, one man's lifetime, he has seen all this happen. I don't think any other age in history would have produced such outstanding technical and scientific results.
This is true. Right, how many you said the population in 26 was, how many?
43.
43. Right, from 43 to what is it now?
It'd be 13,000 now.
And during tourist season?
Well, it would be greater. I think you have about a 60-odd thousand tourist influx. So the town is becoming a pretty important cog in the wheel.
It certainly is, and at last I think being recognised, this has been recognised down in that funny little place called Canberra. But what do you see as the future of Alice Springs?
Well, I think if you want to expand in Alice Springs, I think you have to really set out to cater for tourism. Alice Springs is a town, of course, that many people, including myself, want to preserve as far as possible the character. Now, you can't have it both ways. You can't have a town like Alice, as was depicted in the days of
Flynn
and all these people. If you want progress at all, you have to take the opportunities that are offering, and the only opportunity that we have in Alice Springs for the advancement of the town would rest with tourism. You have a cattle industry, of course, which is strictly governed by the rainfall. This will be, if not at its peak now, it will be very near it at maximum production. You have a limited mining potential. There has been no big mines discovered. You have no possibility of ever introducing agriculture on any sort of a scale, except the limited scale for the town. And the only avenue that is open to you then must be the tourist industry. Now, we know that in Alice Springs we have a tourist industry that can be developed on a 12-monthly basis. We have the domestic tourist, of course, from Australia, who comes up in the winter to escape the winter of the south. But we also should be chasing the tourist from overseas who comes down, especially from the northern hemisphere, in his winter month to enjoy the sunshine of Australia in the south.
What do you think we, as and I like to consider myself now, even though I'm not yet accepted, I will be in time, I suppose, another 10 years, what can we do to help in this, in building up and attracting and looking after tourists?
Well, I feel that the main thing is to make the tourist feel that he's welcome. This covers a lot of ground, I know, but in the past, of course, and I probably have been as big of an offender as everybody else around the place, we've looked on tourists as a nuisance. But I think we have to realise that if we want tourists, we have to make them welcome, we have to cater for them in our different fields, and only by having a tourist satisfied with a visit will we attract others. He will go away and by word of mouth pass the message on. And if you don't have a satisfied tourist, you won't have a prosperous tourist industry.
I'd like to say at this stage too, Jock, before leaving, I have 4 children and have lived in most states of Australia and certainly seen the educational side of this thing. I have been amazed, staggered by the standard, both physically of the buildings themselves and the potential, but also of the standard of education here in Alice Springs. It is as high as anywhere else in Australia and higher than most places.
This is so, Bill. I think we can cater for anybody who wants to reside here. We can cater for the health requirements. It has been, we know, a little behind, a little below standard until recently, and I think when we have a new hospital here, we'll be able to look forward to a health service that will compete and compare with any part of Australia. This takes care of the problems of the health of women and children and the Indigenous people. We can then look forward to and know that we have, as you say, a first-class educational system. What we are short on at the present time, of course, and we have to face this fact, is job opportunities for the young as they finish school. This is something that I don't know how we'll actually overcome. We will
This is not only a local problem, by the way.
It's not only a local problem, it's a worldwide problem, Australia-wide problem anyhow. And we want to keep our younger people here. We don't want to see them go away, but inevitably a proportion of them will have to go away for it.
I must agree, although it is an Australia-wide problem, it probably is harder here because of the very structure of Alice Springs.
This is right. By extending, of course, the town and tourism and otherwise, we attract industries of a type. We have transport industries, we have the service industries, we hope we will have a petroleum industry. All these things will help to create opportunities for our young people. We like them to stay. We want them to stay.
True enough, as I said last week with someone here, although tourism, this is a must and it must expand and it must make Alice Springs go bigger and bigger, you can never destroy the soul of a place like Alice Springs.
I would hate to think we did this, or I would be a party to doing it.
Couldn't do it, Jock.
No.
Jock, I know you're a busy fellow, and I've been very pleased that you have spent a bit of your time in your busy day to say hello to us in Heart to Heart.
Thanks, Bill.